Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here for this week's Friday Morning GM, and we're going to talk about the Ravens offense in 2024. A topic we've been probably putting off for a little bit but we got to the defense. If you didn't listen to that one, it's one of our best shows, I think. I would advise you to go back and listen to that one. So go down the list. It's about 7 or 8 ago. It's last week's show, and Voss did a wonderful job of bringing his thoughts to bear, and hopefully I've got some things to add too. But this week we're talking about the offense. And Voss, where do you want to start?
Yeah, looking forward to the offense. Has a better long-term outlook than the defense, especially or particularly for next year. Why don't we start let's start at the top. Let's start at quarterback. We have Lamar Jackson. Obviously, his cap hit is going to increase from $22 million in 23 to $32 million in 24 as that tiered up, of the slightly backloaded deal to compensate for the rise of the cap. But don't have a backup quarterback under contract right now. They're both unrestricted. Tyler Huntley is a $1.5 million valuation on over the cap.
Yes. I don't know if he'll re-sign for the vet minimum, but that's basically what I'd be offering right now. And if I didn't get it, I'd probably be trying to reload with a quarterback in the draft. I've kind of felt that way for a while, and I've also kind of feel like Ravens might be a little bit short on draft picks this year to let a 6 go, say, to get that backup quarterback. Jackson's clearly the guy for the next 4 years. But we've also seen around the league what's happened to teams that think their guy will start all 17 games.
Right. That's a double-edged sword of the quarterback position. You don't want to put too much into your backup quarterback. Obviously, that lowers your ceiling at other positions. Pretty unlikely that you're going to win a championship with your backup quarterback, but you don't want to be knocked out of the playoff race if your starter's only missing a few games because your backup is of no quality. So I'm pretty much in the same boat there. I'd like to see a Tyler Huntley or maybe even Josh Johnson or someone of that talent level brought in and go pretty cheap there.
So you wouldn't try and go out and get like a career at this point backup. Let's say Joe Flacco was available for whatever year and he were willing to come back and do it, or Mitch Trubisky or
Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, Tyrod Taylor would be pretty good actually. So that's if we're talking about a guy at that level, or you'd prefer to have a Huntley or Johnson really. Huntley and Johnson have really never won anything, whereas those other guys.
I think I'd probably prefer Huntley just because of the age and because I think brings more on the ground, which has a benefit to the rushing attack. Some of the teams, like the Minnesota, for instance, they traded for Dobbs at the deadline. I don't know if I would have made that move. I think sometimes when your starter goes down, maybe you're better off long-term bottoming out. You don't want to sell that message to your fan base, but you are going to receive a better draft pick. For instance, the 2021 Ravens, I guess they lost every game after Lamar, but they stayed very competitive, even though they lost a lot of their high-end players. So it's a balancing act. Probably 5th or 6th on the offensive needs list.
Okay, right. It's low. And Kyle Hamilton, of course, was the reward for falling to number or rising to number 14, right? Where they got it.
Yep, number 14.
So, all right, not much difference there. We both want to economize anyway at the backup quarterback spot. So let's move on. You want to talk running back next?
Yeah, let's just go right down the list. Running back, probably going to be a point of debate this offseason among the fan base. I know some are adherents to the premium position or positional value philosophy, and some seem to be kind of anti-position. They want to kind of fade that. Pete Mitchell, I think, is going to be one of your main guys going forward. Very well last few games. They have Justice Hill under contract for $3 million next year with the potential of $2.5 million savings. Probably might want to have him to take a haircut. And then obviously the unrestricted free agents, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins.
So I think it's fantastic that they found out what they have with J.K. Mitchell. It's been one of the big benefits. And I actually think it's a hidden little bit of lemonade and an enormous lemon at tight end that they're going to find some things out this year. But at running back, Mitchell was the key guy entering camp for 2024 because they didn't have anybody else under contract. They have a lightning in a bottle, it appears. He certainly will be a very significant number of carries. It looks like the guy they need is a power back. First of all, if you're talking stylistically, a guy who's going to carry the rock a number of times. Edwards perfectly meets that description. I guess the question is, what contract would you be willing to go to for Gus Edwards? I've got a number in mind, but let's hear yours first.
As do I. So Gus is making about $3.5 million this year, I believe. I think 3.25 maybe. OTC values him at $4.5 million. I would go to 2.5. I don't think he's worth what he made last go round when he was younger and also pre-ACL injury. The running back market has also gone down since in that time. And I did find this interesting, like to kind of weave it in here. The Ravens currently in the 2023 season have the third best rushing offense DVOA ever in history.
Yeah.
And that's with not necessarily the most inspiring crew of running backs. And it's really Lamar Jackson. And when you pay him that contract, one of the ways to receive the benefit of it is to be able to go cheap where you can. And we've seen it, whether it was Marty Warning's offense, Greg Roman's offense, Todd Monken's offense, a whole different cast of running backs and offensive linemen. Lamar produces elite rushing offenses. So for me, I'd be about $2.5 million on Gus or Dobbins or another veteran. Really just that's kind of my number, 2.5 to 3.5. Get the best kind of guy you can can, and then maybe add a power back on day 3 of the draft as a succession plan for the 25 season.
Yeah, and I think the guy you get in the draft can be better because of Jackson, so I'd agree with that. And the undrafted guy you can get can be better. I wouldn't even mind like picking through the scrap heap on this. And honestly, while I don't want to do this organizationally, what do I want to do in terms of how it might impact the locker room? I think whether you sign either Dobbins or Edwards, you have a couple of guys in-house who might be fighting for the same dollars at this point. And I would not have a problem going as high as $4 million guaranteed over 2 years with $2 million more in the second year, maybe $2.5 million with 3.5 guaranteed. So I think we're in kind of the same neighborhood, but I don't mind 1 year out for $4 million on a Gus. I would pay it. He's been great this year. He's really been a guy who's been able to run the ball even when the other team knows it's coming. I trust him a lot more to be on the field, next year. And it's not a matter of trust the player; it's trust the injury history of the player than I would with Dobbins. And yet, I still think there could be a vet min incentives deal that you work out with Dobbins that could also be good, but it would have to be 1.0 whatever with a chance to make 5 kind of thing. So I wouldn't do anything that was above the vet minimum for Dobbins beyond the incentives.
I agree with that for sure. Dobbins, for what it's worth, Brad Spielberger from PFF put out his top 10 impending free agents per position today. We're recording this on the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. Dobbins was number 7 of all running backs. So some of these, 5th best running back last year, I think was below $5 million. What he received on the market. So it's a depressed market, and the Ravens should take advantage of that. And I think going running back by committee is a long-term strategy. It's beneficial in multiple different ways.
Right. And you also, there is something else going on here is you really don't want to have 2 veteran running backs on the team, period. You always kind of want to be grooming your next cheap young running backs. So they need a guy, and even if they get him as UDFA after they signed both, say, Dobbins and Edwards, that they can have to be their 2024 Keaton Mitchell, I'm going to first play in 2025 kind of player. So they need to have that guy. Owen Wright, I don't believe is the guy. I think that is that ship has probably sailed. But we'll see. The guy may be sitting around on somebody else's practice squad right now. DaCosta may even know who he is and be preparing for some kind of futures deal when those start to happen a little bit later.
Yes, I think it's running backs. kind of you want to burn and turn, almost, like you're dealing Texas Hold'em. Just continue that pipeline and once rookie contract expires, you really don't want to be locked into too much more. Beyond that, it's very few and far between those long-term contracts work out.
All right, so now that we've alienated every running back out there, where would you like to go now? How about fullback and Patrick Ricard?
Sure. So fullback, Ricard is in line to receive a pay bump from $4 million to $5 million, with a potential of $4 million savings. OTC's valuation is $1.1 million. Obviously, that's probably based on some sort of counting stat that may be skewed against his position since he doesn't accumulate many stats. I was on the fence about Pat. I think he has been able to play in line this season in a way that makes him more valuable. If the choice is between paying Gus or keeping Ricard, where would you be on that decision?
Wow, that is a very, very big deal. I think I would be in favor of keeping Ricard at the exact same dollar amount. Definitely, if you're talking about Dobbins, by the way, it wouldn't even be a question at all. Right. Ricard has had his own injury history, and he has not had his best season as a blocker this year. So he used to be, so far ahead of every other blocker as a fullback. A couple things have happened. One is he's played less snaps. So when you play less snaps, and if you particularly look at something like a PFF rating, you don't gain the benefit of it. Second of all, he's a worse pass blocker than a run blocker, and that hasn't worked to his favor this year. So I think he's very important to the offense. I don't think it's necessarily a really easy position to find the replacement for him, although they could probably go that way too. Find a defensive lineman they like who moves really well and move on to that, or even maybe an offensive lineman. Even if they had Tyler Linderbaum and he hadn't been highly rated as a center, and that guy's available as a UDFA or whatever, Nick Easton or somebody like that, a guy like that could end up being your fullback. It's a really difficult question, but I'm not even sure I would pay the whole $4 million on Ricard. I might try and get him for $3 million next year, or re-sign him for 2 years, $6 million kind of thing, and see if that would work out.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think he's a player that you can expect to maintain his level of play for a few more years beyond, although he has had now two hip surgeries?
2 hip injuries,
I think it's 2, but they're not a broken hip Dennis Pitta variety where it's a chronic injury. And I think I would agree that he probably impacts the rushing offense more than pretty much interchangeable running backs. So I think I probably would side on the Pat. But if you can potentially have him agree to a reduction in pay, because $5 million is a pretty good size cap number.
Yeah, but the $1 million is already spent, so it's the $4 million that they can get reduced. And can they get $4 million reduced to 3? That might be reasonable. It won't be $4 million reduced to 2. So yeah. Okay. So move on. Wide receiver, tight end. What's next? Sure.
Let's go tight end. So Mark Andrews, his cap hit is rising from 13.5 to 17 million. And then the Ravens are in pretty good shape with options behind him. Both Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar are in the midst of their second season, and Travis Vokolek is his first season on the practice squad.
So in terms of Andrews, I didn't actually know this. Actually, was not sure of the exact term if you'd have just asked me. But he'll be 29 for the season next year, and there's actually a $5.1 million savings if they cut him. Mm-hmm. Now you can't find a Pro Bowl tight end for $5.1 million. I'm not claiming that, but if the Ravens were in a position, and the other big one is going to come up on the offense still yet, where there's a savings on a cornerstone contract. We're at kind of a critical juncture for Andrews where we have to find out can he still play football? That's the first question that's there. And here's the thing: there's a roster bonus, and I believe that'll be paid on the 5th day of the league year, the way it usually is, of $4 million of that. So they're not going to have full information unless he returns this year. So if he returns this year and plays in the Super Bowl, they'll know something. Otherwise, they probably won't. and he'll have to he'll sit out. So I expect that to be the case. By the way, I don't expect Andrews to be back, even though there's been some nice little positive things said, which means a decision will have to be made. And this is a potentially utterly heartbreaking decision for the fans and for the organization. I don't think I can do it for just a $5 million savings with how important he's been to the offense and how important I still think he is with the relationship with Lamar Jackson. And I'll add one more thing. If you're thinking of cutting Beckham, and I don't think Beckham may or may not be reasonably inexpensive to sign this next year. So the decision may be made for us. But if you're thinking of cutting Beckham and you cut Beckham and Andrews in the same year, I don't even want to think about what that'll do to Lamar in terms of how he views the organization. Yeah.
Sure. So worth noting, even with your saving $5 million with a release or a trade, you're losing $12 million in dead money, which is already spent. But worth noting, what is the ratio there? Mark is currently the sixth highest paid tight end in the league, which is a relative bargain, considering that he's probably the third or fourth best tight end. And as far as pass catcher, because the tight end market is depressed in comparison to the receiver market, I think it's a good value. Certainly the chemistry with Lamar is another reason to want to keep him around. The way he carries himself, I think he brings a lot of really good intangibles to the locker room. So to me, this is one where I think you want to keep your fingers crossed that he has a pretty speedy recovery and it's not a long-term injury.
Yeah, I think that's where we have to be. One of the things people don't understand just for how long and how these two careers have run on parallel train tracks between him and Jackson, or on the same track, whatever you want to say is intertwining. But they both came into camp as number 2 team players in 2018. And they got very comfortable with each other right away. And one of the things you saw is even 2018 was that Jackson did 2 things a lot at camp. He ran the ball, and I'm like, what is he running it for again? He's got to learn to throw the ball at some point. And a lot of his throws went to Andrews. And since then, we're 5 years later, and everything goes to Mark Andrews still in camp. It's the weirdest thing is, he's got multiple receivers, but you still see the connection with Andrews there all the time. And if the defense for the Baltimore Ravens can't even figure out how to stop Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews with ones versus ones, I just don't know how you subjugate that value that he brings to the team. Agree with everything else, by the way, you're saying in terms of the fire, the intensity, and the being a good locker room guy. You never hear one bad word about Mark Andrews in terms of things he said, or sometimes with players, there's guys who just are a little bit big mouth and occasionally will get themselves into trouble. And Marlon is hilarious. He's a great guy. I don't think any of it is malicious, but he can occasionally say something that's a little stupid, and it comes out, and he's very active on social media. Mark, not that kind of player. And so anyway.
Yeah, I think he's a cornerstone player, and if he does not recover and he's not the same player next year, then I think you take a look at Tim going into the 25 off season. But at this point, I think any ideas of trading or releasing are premature, and of course, this is the first significant injury he's really had. He's had some lingering things, a shoulder injury, I think, in 2019, and some other items. But hopefully this doesn't become a Ronnie Stanley situation. It's something he can rebound from quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not the same, we hope, as far as a chronic injury that Stanley has had or that Dennis Pitta had. Now, Pitta was a hip, so it's a different situation. Right. But the Pitta situation, they tried 4 or 5 times to re-sign. It seemed like this. It's probably not that many, to alter his contract to see if they could keep him around at reduced rates and give him a chance to come back and whatnot. But the writing was on the wall a long time before. And, from an injury perspective, they're going to have to be ruthlessly centered between optimism and pessimism on looking at this. It's a huge component of the cap, and they've got to figure out whether it makes sense or not. And I think it's less of a case for 2024 and more of a case for 2025 when there's $11 million savings for cutting him, and they'll need that for the increase in Lamar Jackson's pay.
Right, agreed. Just on the topic of Dennis Pitta, they actually gave him the first extension after he broke his hip the first time, which was probably a mistake on Ozzy's part because he made him, I think he was top 5 or at least top 10 highest paid tight end. And then they did some restructures and some pay cuts after the second one. And then they ended up doing the same thing with Nick Boyle, where he was just off the surgery and they extended him a year. So we need to be careful with injured tight ends. But so do you think that they need to address tight end in the draft, or you think that the three young guys plus hopefully healthy Andrews is good enough?
Well, this is why there's a little bit of lemonade in this gigantic lemon, is that, they are going to be forced to find some of these things out. And I would be in favor of first elevations, then a roster spot for Vokalek, because I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think he'll be signed away from the Ravens. And by the way, for those of you who don't know about practice squad signings, the first thing you have to do is you have to sign the player, and you have to agree to have him on your own active roster for 3 weeks. So there's a lot of teams just aren't looking to do that. But if somebody had a tight end need and they come to Vokalek and they say, hey, look, we've got an opportunity here, you don't want to pass this up, the Ravens will still have an opportunity to also elevate Travis. And I think the situation here in Baltimore with a tight end centric offense in a lot of ways, it's not as tight end centric as it was with Roman, but it's still more than a typical team in terms of being tight end centric and how much they value run blocking and whatnot. I think Vokalek might say, I'm going to be more valued here. Let me stay there. That's only a 3-week guarantee I'm getting from this other team. And I think he stays. So anyway, that's the good news. So I think they'll have 3 practice squad elevations unless they decide they need those at some other position, in which case they might go early to extend it. But you look the last couple of weeks, the Ravens I don't think they've had 2 practice squad elevations now in it might have been 3 of the last 4 weeks. So they've been having 1 or 0.
Yep. I don't think they had any 2 weeks ago. It was Josh Ross was the only one last week. And then I think before that, it was Kevon Seymour before he got nicked up.
Right.
They're well, it's interesting, the inactives and how that counts and who's healthy enough to play and who's healthy enough to dress. I wouldn't necessarily think that Vokalek will be elevated necessarily the next 3 games in a row. I think it's going to be more game plan specific, and maybe they save some for it. It depends on the game plan. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, they essentially have 3 tight ends with Ricard still, and that's still enough to run 12 personnel when you need to.
Yeah, that's true. They can do that. And just this last week they did something that I do not get at all, and that was to deactivate Broderick Washington for a game. I still haven't heard an explanation of that. Was he sick? Was he, just unavailable for some other reason, or was this a healthy scratch?
Harbaugh intimated that it was based on their expected game plan from Cincinnati, that they were going to be pass heavy, and they thought that, I guess, Jalen Armour-Davis or whoever else got the final activation would be more beneficial. And that was on the couple hours after we recorded the defensive show, which was definitely interesting. So not you give a player an extension, you're not expecting to deactivate him. You're figuring that Brent Urban, a veteran player who's only can give you about 15 snaps a game, is going to give you more impact than Washington. That's not really a good sign.
No, it's not a good sign at all. And they both, as you were kind of intimating there, they're both kind of 5-techs in a way that Williams, the guy who'd knocked down a lot of passes last year, and that was one of the reasons he ended up getting the extension. Right player, right price between him and Matabike. They might have gotten the wrong player, even if it was the right price. So
we'll see. And then again, Travis Jones got an extra about 10 or 15 snaps that game, percentage-wise, compared to what he had been. So we'll see how it shakes out.
I'm going to make a distinction here. I think this is actually important. I never, ever want to go with 4 defensive linemen active for a game unless there's a damn good reason. And in particular on this team, it's more egregious than in past teams. They did it in the opening game of the 2019 season. They went with 4 defensive linemen. And I said, Miami may not be set up to run power football, but I don't know why we want to test that, because, you got a few ways you can lose the game. But if an injury at defensive line on opening day in Miami, how freaking hot that's going to be,
Yes.
is going to basically sap your defensive line. That's one of the ways you can lose that game. Of course, the Ravens went on, they won 59-10, no problem. So, but I never like to see that in terms of having only 4 active. And this team in particular does not have any outside linebackers who kick inside. So they don't have any relief on defensive line snaps that they can look to. They were perfect, by the way, in terms of making it work. I think that the fact that the Ravens are able to really dial in very closely in terms of what they want to give up on the ground and what they expect to get from the air on it. And so far it's worked out basically perfectly that, yeah, sure. They allowed 4.5 yards per non-kneel this year, but they've also allowed 4.18 yards per pass play. So stylistically or schematically, they're making a choice on how they want to play. And the choice, if you want to make the argument that you can get by with 4, I still probably wouldn't do it. I'd still probably want the rotation when you're playing 2.18 defensive linemen per snap. And I'm even if with Cincinnati you're going to play 2, the problem comes that each of those guys has to play an average of 40% of the snaps, and then you might play extra snaps if they get their running game going. And I really don't like it. But anyway, I don't want to go too far down this road. But
I agree. I mean, we were kicking around the idea of going to a 6 defensive lineman. So now they go down to 4, and it's definitely an eyebrow raiser. But let's reel it back. And I think we pretty much covered tight ends. I think we should probably move on to wide receiver. Now, this is a position where I do think is one of their primary needs heading into next offseason. And I would say they might even need 2. But for the breakdown, Zay Flowers obviously entering his 2nd year, Rashad Bateman entering his 4th season, and Tylan Wallace will be a restricted free agent. And then Odell Beckham Jr. is unrestricted, as is Nelson Aguilar and Devin Duvernay.
So that's a lot of guys who've done some receiving for you in the past who will be moving on. Let's start with Bateman, because I think he's the pivotal figure here. He's entering year 4, and the Ravens have to make a decision on his 5th-year option, which is no decision at all because it's $14 million to pick that up, and ain't no way the Ravens are playing $14 million. It's maybe not completely impossible if he played through the Super Bowl and suddenly, stood out in a role we have not yet seen at, 6 catches a game so far. I don't really believe that's going to happen, even though I think he could improve significantly. So I think the Ravens are at a point where they really ought to try maybe during the rest of this season. And they can't do it during the rest of the season. They can first negotiate with him at the end of the year because it's 3 years. Right. So they have to wait until the end of the year to negotiate with him at all. But at the end of the year, come up with a contract that makes sense, that keeps him in Baltimore maybe another 3 years. And I don't have a firm idea of exactly what that number would be, because definitely going to be significant. But maybe
I think these. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say maybe 3 for 30, which is with some backloading to the deal, so it's not all guaranteed up front.
I'd like to see Bateman prove that he can stay healthy and prove that he can be just generate some more volume before going into $10 million a year, personally. And I think these next 5 games or 6 games without Mark Andrews is really his prove it time and to earn even the consideration of a long-term extension. Not that I'm down on the player at all, but he needs to prove it. This is prove it time.
Now, I completely agree with you, by the way. And I just can't even imagine the locker room these next few weeks, because first of all, they're going to play teams against quality opposition. You got a lot of different receivers who want the football as always. So Beckham's going to say, hey, look, I'm just coming into my own. This is my chance. No Mark Andrews. Give me the football. I can do a lot of things to fix these teams. And he might not be wrong that he should be getting more targets based on what he's done so far this season. Nelson Aguilar has gotten 10 yards per target very quietly for the Ravens and is their most productive on a per snap basis. Beckham is by the way, also back. I think it's 7.9 yards per target right now, which is shockingly high for him at this age, frankly. I mean, he's had some big plays last few days and last few weeks. And then it doesn't extend just to the wide receiver group. You've got 2 tight ends who are saying, look, we're finally out from Mark Andrews' shadow. Give us the football. And maybe Kolar has no particular claim on that, given what's gone so far on in his first 2 seasons. But Isaiah Likely, he's got to be just chomping at the bit to get an opportunity right now and prove that the Ravens should, think about him long term, build him as more of an offensive weapon this next year. But I think it could get pretty chippy these next few weeks. And I really would hate to see a situation where the Ravens are winning and it stays chippy among guys who really clearly want the football more.
It seems that Bateman is probably the player that's most at risk for that type of, just kind of reading his body language and some of his comments. Beckham has been pretty much, I'm here to win for the team, and I'll take as many targets as come to me. And I'm not saying that's necessarily how he is, but he's saying the right things. And Tylan Wallace is another guy too. I mean, he really hasn't got an opportunity very much at all. He, I believe, played 2 offensive snaps last week compared to Duvernay's 0. So that was maybe a little bit of a sign. Or do we want to see what we have with him, or did he surpass Duvernay on the depth chart? A lot of moving parts. Hopefully, they continue winning, and the players all continue putting the team first.
There's a great point on Duvernay as well. I mean, he's basically, I don't see another way he's not leaving town. And he's been very effective for the Ravens as a return guy. Somebody will want him in that capacity, and probably want him as a gadget guy, where the Ravens have not used him very much this year as opposed to using a lot last year. So I don't think Tylan Wallace, based on how his career has unfolded, can look at himself as anything but an NFL survivor possibility now, where he plays another 4 years on special teams for some team that really values that. So I think he's the least likely to say anything. I probably agree with you that Bateman would be the most likely to say something, but also the dynamic so far has been Bateman getting 2 and 3 targets per game, and Beckham got 7 in this last game. That's the reason you can't judge this thing. And I've got a kind of an analogy from real life is when you go to Las Vegas, you meet more weird people in a week than you do in a year easily back home. And the reason is, first of all, you're meeting a lot of people because you're at the craps table or at a table with people. And then the other thing is it's the stress. So it takes stress a lot of times to bring out the worst in people. And you just see this kind of behavior and people upset and drunk and whatnot. It's one of the entertaining things and sometimes very sad things about going to Las Vegas, to see these people with breaking their own lives. But I'll tell you this, in terms of Beckham, he hasn't been tested yet in terms of a bad situation where he's not getting the ball at all and what he might say in the situation. I think that he doesn't mean he's TO, but he could end up being a lot worse than where he is right now.
Right. Well, just to put some numbers on these unrestricted free agents, according to Over the Cap, they have Beckham valued at $3 million, so certainly not necessarily getting your money's worth there. Aguilar also at $3 million, and then Duvernay at the vet minimum. So based off of what they've done so far this season, I would be okay with Beckham on a reduced rate. Certainly not for $15 million. I do think he's had a positive influence. I think he does bring some intangibles that are maybe not presented in the stats. What would be your number on Beckham? Do you have anything in mind?
I don't think it would be anything that would interest Camp Beckham. What would I do? They're saying like 1 year?
1 year.
Maybe $7 million plus incentives.
Yeah. Okay. It's about fair. I'd be about there too. At some point he's got, might not interest Camp Beckham, but if no NFL teams want to pay you $15 million when they're only, recording 600 yards or 800 yards in a season or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, so, and if you think Beckham's going to get to 800 yards,
well, he had a good one last game. What do you have? 116, and now no Andrews. So maybe you figure he's going to be more in the 60 range going forward, but who knows?
Yeah, 374 right now with 6 games to play. So it's not impossible. I mean, he could pick up another 400 yards, I guess, and get to 800. But there's a lot going on in that. He's probably now a reasonable bet for the over. He has to average about 35 yards a game to beat the Las Vegas over, which was 580 at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Depending on his health, and his snaps have been reduced greatly the last 2-3 weeks, but he led the team in targets last week too. So it's more of saving him for certain moments. Aguilar, I think, has been a pleasant addition, a good addition. I don't think any of these players were looking at longer than a 1-year deal, but I wouldn't be opposed to Aguilar on a smaller deal, or even Duvernay. If he's willing to take the vet minimum, I do think he brings something to the return game. So essentially, I think you definitely want to be at least six deep at receiver, and I think you want to have 4 starting caliber players. I taken some heat from that in previous years, pounding the table for that, and people were saying, well, this is Greg Roman's offense, you don't need that. And then when Bateman went down last year, they certainly needed it. It's kind of the analog to the cornerback position where you need 4 guys. You have 3 on the field a lot of times, and you need a good backup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm even nervous when your 5th guy can't play corner, and I would agree. What they've done with Monken is good in terms of, first of all, rotating the receiver snaps. And I think reducing Beckham's snaps was a very good thing in terms of keeping him fresh. We've seen that at the end of some games here. Looks to generally be healthy, but I don't think that means you assume that at his age he's going to be playing anywhere close to 100% of the snaps. So it could be a reasonable choice to keep Aguilar as well. He's 31 next year. Whatever he's going to get is going to have to be pretty close to the minimum. And there may be somebody else who really looks at the last 4 years for Nelson Aguilar, and it really tells a story. Like, went to Baltimore, played with Lamar Jackson, 10 yards per target, was in hell in New England the previous 2 years, where he averaged about 7 yards per target, actually 7.1 over 2 seasons with Mac Jones. And then if you look back at his time with the Raiders before then, he had 10.9 yards per target. So while he's been near the bottom of some metrics the last couple of years prior to coming to the Ravens, he's looked like a different guy here. And, the one thing, the reason I like him for the Ravens probably a little bit more than other people do is, and I really, really didn't like the trade. So I'm upfront about that. I hated the trade. I hated giving up a 6th-round pick for a veteran like this. But I did, the signing.
Compensatory pick, just so we're clear.
Yeah, compensatory pick, exactly. So, they offset the Josh Oliver pick they were going to get, which would have been a 6th-round pick in 24. But anyway, I really didn't like the pick exchange there. But he's been much better than the Ravens could have expected. And the way in which he's being better, that he extends plays well, is really good for this team. So we've seen it for Bateman. We've seen it from Aguilar. Don't know that we've seen too much of it from Beckham, but we've probably seen a little bit, and we should really figure out these next few weeks, because over, say, next 6 weeks, there should be close to 20 extended plays during that period where we'll get an opportunity to see who's Lamar's new guy. Right. And maybe it's Flowers, maybe it's somebody else.
Sure. And for what it's worth, again, Spielberger ranked Beckham 11th out of all receivers coming up on free agency. So just, looking forward, Flowers is essentially your wide receiver 1. Bateman is essentially your wide receiver 2, but maybe for the short term, not the long term. I think you would probably want to keep one veteran, or maybe add a different veteran, but somewhere in that, less than the 10 million range, even if it's, and then also draft somebody on day 2, ideally, would be where I would want to draft. Did a little bit of research into this a couple years ago. It's a little bit outdated, but the hit rate in the top 100 on receivers was significantly better than after the top 100. It is a coveted position, and not a whole lot of game breakers fall through the cracks at that position. Well,
the Ravens have, you do have a good amount of testing of those guys in college, because a lot of them are brought in. They're very metrics based when they come in. It's not like defensive tackle or some offensive line positions where you learn your craft over time and you can become a lot better than you were. So I agree. It's something that, they probably have to go a little higher in the draft. I will say this. Offensive tackle is by such a wide margin the number 1 need of the Baltimore Ravens. There's no way they could ignore that with pick number 1, and that leaves them with 2 selections that they can try and pick up a wide receiver. And there are a lot of pigs trying to get attached to that nipple in terms of where that needs to go.
Yeah, well, that's positional value theory. exemplified right there. You're going into a draft, you need a corner, a tackle, and a receiver, and those are coveted positions.
It's not a good.
Right. Well, and it seems like every year they're like, we need a pass rusher, an outside linebacker, an offensive tackle, wide receiver, and then you take a linebacker and a running back or something, and then the next year you just repeat the cycle. And I agree with you. Well, let's break down the offensive tackle, because I had a question as far as, or maybe I'll just ask it now. I'm in complete agreement with you that offensive tackle, left tackle in particular, is the largest need. How much are you willing to stray from BPA or potentially trade up a little bit to ensure that need is filled? Because I'm a proponent of BPA, but I think it's should be followed more strictly when you're a little bit further away from contending, and I think need becomes an extra 10% when you have one specific hole.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a good year for tackles, so there'll be a fair amount of depth in that first round. One of the problems for the Ravens is going to be if they're drafting in the 20s, and that should be where they are, unless they miss the playoffs somehow, or unless they win it all and they're drafting at 32, say. The Ravens will be a skeet shot target for losing that draft pick by trade up to another team. So They need to be very careful about that. So, the one they lost, that's the biggest one ever, was they drafted 29th in 2007. And the two guys who were on the board the guy who was on the board at 28 was Staley. The guy was a long-term San Francisco left tackle. He would have been the answer for a decade after Ronnie Stanley. It would have been perfect. He would have been the perfect player. But it turned out San Francisco traded ahead of the Ravens. I went berserk, and then the Ravens drafted Ben Grubbs with the next selection. Grubbs is a good player, good value at 29, as it turned out, but he's not the kind of player you want. Ideally, you get a guard you think highly of in a lower round. Sure. And then they also had Marshall Yanda competing for basically the Grubbs / Yanda money when that became due. So it was a tough call all the way around. I know Mike Preston for a long time was still claiming, and this is after he's at New Orleans, was still claiming Grubbs was a better offensive lineman than Yanda, which I've always found funny. But
Grubbs only lasted 3 more years, right? He went to Kansas City, I think, and then his career was definitely not nearly as long as Marshall Yanda's. I know that for a fact.
Oh yeah, or as good, honestly. The only thing
not even.
So 3 years in New Orleans and one at Kansas City, finished in 2015, and Yanda finished in 19. Was it? He was done after
20.
He played 20.
He played the 20. Yeah.
Okay.
He played 20.
All right. That was one I. Nope, 19. He finished after that horrible Tennessee game.
Okay. That's right. After Justin Simmons spit on him, Jeffrey Simmons. He caught a touchdown this week, by the way. On the topic of draft and how the draft looks, I just thought this was interesting. PFF put out their top 100 big board. Certainly a long way to go, but there are 6 offensive tackles they have first-round grades on compared to only 2 defensive tackles. Just because we were talking about the scarcity of defensive linemen last week. And there are also another 7 day 2 or offensive tackles they have in their top 100. So it's a good class. 13 in the top 100 and 6 in the top first 32. It's a pretty good class. And let's move on to that, because that's really what I think a lot of the ink is going to be spilled this offseason is going to be on offensive tackle. Ronnie Stanley, 23.5 cap hit this season, expands to 26 next season with the potential of $8 million in savings. Let's just go one by one, I guess. Let's go with Ronnie first.
The reason why they would not cut Stanley next year is not really about Ronnie Stanley. It's about the barriers to getting a new left tackle. Ronnie Stanley has played poorly enough to be cut this year. That's the sad truth. I love the guy. I've loved the draft pick since they first made it. I thought they got the right guy relative to Tunsil. That has not completely worked out, obviously, in terms of health and reliability of him. But it is a case where Ronnie has been a terrific player. And I thought, basically when he came back from his injury in his very first year and he played well for about 8 games, I thought, well, needs 7 more years of that, and he's in the Ring of Honor. Basically, is what I'm thinking. And he played very well through 2019, but the injury has just messed him up like nobody's business. And it's not a knock on Ronnie specifically, but I think he's probably playing through still a lot of pain right now. And I have to imagine it's not just a one-sided fear here. They didn't extend him because there's a possibility he might retire.
Yes. Well, I think it's certainly possible. It's not just the ankle now. He's had a shoulder injury this year. He's had, I believe, 2 separate knee injuries. I don't know if it's the same knee. It just seems like a matter of time every time he's on the field where he's going to get hurt. He can't seem to anchor, which is causing him to get rolled up on at a high rate. As the old adage, availability is the best availability. At this point, we haven't seen the last stretch of the season yet, but at this point, I think I would bite the bullet and release him and take that $8 million and put it towards a more longer term solution there.
All right. So the interesting thing about this is you don't really put that $8 million towards a long-term solution. That you put that $8 million towards some other position, and you use draft capital and most of what you have this next year to replace your left tackle. Because could they do it in the second round? Here's the problem with a second round or a third round left tackle, which they could do. Probably the best solution is to have Ronnie play 1 more year for that $8 million. And then you have the guy who has a chance to get strong in the building and learn the system, and he'll be a better opportunity, better fit to jump in his second year. Or maybe he comes in at right tackle or somewhere else where there's an injury half a season in. It could be left tackle, unfortunately. So you always got to live with that possibility. But that's one of the reasons I kind of still think the Ravens are not going to do it, and that's handicapping it from the outside in terms of what the Ravens know. The Ravens may know Ronnie Stanley really doesn't want to play next year. If they know that, and that's really what it's going to be a fight to get him on the field, a fight to get him to practice, a fight, all of that. Then I would understand, I guess, why they would do it. But either way, very tough, heartbreaking day for Baltimore Ravens fans will be the day Ronnie leaves.
Agreed. So that's going to be the main topic, and remains to be seen. Maybe he comes back, refines his form from last season down the stretch, and plays well in the postseason, and it's a no-brainer to keep him around. So we'll see how it goes. Morgan Moses is also going to be under contract next season. Last year, $7 million cap hit. 32 years old, so he's old, but he's not ancient. Potential. That's
cheap as hell for his value right now. I mean, it's. I guess look, if you look at OTC, they've got him at 9.6 million, but it's not the $7 million of cap number. It's the 5.5 million of savings. That's the meaningful money, because that's what you would have if you cut him to go out and find somebody else to play that position. Dirt cheap. I mean, and he's still. The problems with injuries have been a problem. If the shoulder injury were chronic, I would have some issues with keeping him, but he's one of the easiest choices of all of the mid to large money players to keep.
I'd probably be more interested in extending him for another year than releasing him, because I think offensive tackles usually, hopefully, age pretty well.
Mm-hmm. His
game ages well.
I mean, he's been very mobile, which has been such a shock in terms of how we've looked at the offensive line this year. He's ridiculously still very mobile. He's able to do these tackle pulls to the far side, and the scoring system basically gives a freebie block, a courtesy block when a player runs his track and can't find anyone. He almost always finds someone. It's remarkable, his ability to get into level 2, find a cornerback, find a safety, find whoever you got. He's got good field vision. He's been a good pass blocker. Which has been something they've been able to depend on him for this time here. They have a lot of obviously big pass rushers in the north, but if you extend him, you do run a risk of getting into the old maid contract situation. And both he and Zeitler are in a similar position. If either of them were extended for 2 years, say, the Ravens probably don't get 2 more years of play out of them. They might get 1, or if they do it several times in a row, they end up getting shorted a year at the end of the player's career. Now, they know how to price for that, I know, but it's just I don't like going into a late contract 32, 33 plus player and then knowing you're probably not going to get the last year out of that contract.
Yeah, it's essentially a void year. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really what it boils down to. I agree with you there, but I would just put him, top 5, probably easily top 5 in Eric DaCosta's best free agent acquisitions of his tenure so far. Next player is Patrick McCary, who is also still under contract, $6.4 million, potential in $4.4 million in savings. As a general theory, I do not like spending a large amount of cap space on backup players or players that are not in the starting 22. Offensive tackle is a definite exception to that. I think we've seen Lamar, and at one point I thought Lamar elevated tackles that he didn't need, but now I don't believe that anymore. I think Lamar needs a competent level of tackle play, and McCary has brought that.
Yeah, I mean, he's been all over the place this year. Obviously, both games against the Browns were very poor, but then he had a good game against Hendrickson and a okay game against Hendrickson where he fought well. But he's a guy, I don't know. I would not cut him to try and save the money. So let's start there.
Sure.
So he's going to finish this contract. So the question really comes down to, do you want to extend a player like that who is a super sub? And one thing I need to know is how old is Patrick McCary now? Is he 29 or something, or how old is he?
That sounds about right to me. Maybe 28.
He's 26 and 100 days.
Wow.
Yeah, I gotta think I would go ahead. I think I would go ahead and extend him if it can be done for 2 more years on a similar deal, if that could be had. So they'll be looking at next year's deal, and they'll be saying that might be a little bit too high, but we're not going to cut you for this, but we do want to give you the option of you take 2 more years here, and then he's a sub. One of the issues with McCary is right now he's exclusively a backup tackle for the Baltimore Ravens, and he could maybe play better on the inside somewhere. Could play better at center, I think, for certain. And the Ravens have cheaper alternatives there, and they have no alternatives at tackle, so he's exclusively there. So he's not a 6-man, I can play every position, versatility. The Ravens aren't trying to harvest that. The Ravens need him as a backup tackle, and I think that's, if they keep him, that would be the reason. And I think if the number were right around $3 to $4 million per year, I would be great with that for another couple of years.
Agreed. I concur with McCary, and I would be okay if push came to shove and Ronnie does not have a strong final third of the season, to have a 2 deep of McCary and a rookie, an early rookie draft pick, 1st or 2nd round pick on the left side, and then Moses and Falele on the right side. It's not perfect, but I think it makes that $8 million of savings for Ronnie worth the squeeze.
So you can have that without doing anything, because all 3 of those other guys are under contract. It's just a matter of making the draft pick. And I guess what's your lowest? Because the comparable situation happened in 2018 or 19. 18, whatever 18, right? When Orlando Brown was drafted in the 3rd round and they had James Hurst, they started him there in what was one of the most funkified decisions I've seen in a long time. Decided to keep Hurst there for half a season, and he played decently. He played pretty well against Von Miller that one game, the Denver game, when Flacco was still quarterback. And Hurst is still kicking around. He's starting some games for the Saints. He started almost a full year last year. I don't know, Ken. It's just a tough place to be with Ronnie. I'm just trying to figure out what is the best of all worlds here, where you can have that succession plan. Because I think long term, I would like to maintain a top 10 offensive line throughout the duration of Lamar's contract. Yeah,
it's one of the most important things on the team.
Very reasonable. Very reasonable. I'm frankly unbelievably pleased with how this line has played. The interior line, which had a lot of problems early in the season, has pulled it together all 3 positions. Linderbaum's elevated his pass blocking to a much higher level, which is the biggest change on the team offensively. Puts Brandon Stevens maybe on the defense, but he's the biggest gain offensively. Zeitler has returned to 100%, maybe even like 115% of what you could hope Zeitler would be at this point in his career. Obviously playing for a contract, and maybe we ought to talk about him next in terms of what do you do with him? Sure.
So 34 years old. So he's not, he's getting up there, but guards are up there with kickers as far as how old you can play, I think. OTC has him valued at $9 million. And just for what it's worth, 7 left guards in the league make more than $9 million. Sorry, 7 right guards. 7 right guards and 7 left guards. But yeah, he's a right guard.
So they've got void years added to his deal. Boy. So he's making, what's the total number? He's effectively making about $9.5 million this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what he'd want in terms of money. I'm sure he wants another contract at this point based on the fact he's done it. Lots of old maid risk here. And my fear of that was greater at the beginning of the season when you had a player who was really struggling to anchor than it is now, where he's played 6 of the last 7 games have been just terrific. So I just don't know if the Ravens can afford another cornerstone contract at guard. And the option that they have here, I'm still very hopeful that's going to be one of the big dollar savings they can make in going to Andrew Voorhees.
Yeah, I think Voorhees is an option. I was talking to Garnett about Voorhees, though, and he pointed out that Voorhees had a pretty extensive injury history early in his college career. So just something to keep in mind. So basically the way I look at it, I think I'm okay moving on from Zeitler. You got to cut somewhere. You got to lose something. He is getting older. But I want a battle royale competition for right guard. I don't want to hand it to Voorhees. I want Ben Cleveland in the mix, who may actually be better at right guard than he has been at left guard, just hasn't had the opportunity. You also have Salah. You have both Doss and Manning, who are on the practice squad. I think if you have 5 guys competing for that spot, I feel pretty comfortable they'll find the right guy. But I think you probably want to have a veteran at left guard in that scenario. If a low-cost veteran, not an expensive one, but like a John Simpson, if the price is right.
Well, Simpson is not going to be expensive. He's got a penalty history that is just outrageous and appears to be a repeating problem now because the Ravens have not really reduced his penalty rate. I made the point that he'd gone 5 consecutive games without a penalty for the first time in his entire career. Just this last week, which is incredible. That a guy in his 4th year, you're at that point. But he's a player that I think bears consideration for re-signing. He's pulled better and he's pass blocked better as the year has gone on. I think one of the things I've liked is that they seem to have honed his help blocking a little bit. So he's processing better from inside out, which at left tackle, I don't care whether you have Stanley there or a rookie, you need it, or McCary. You need it in all 3 cases. He's a reasonable option to re-sign. And he is a 2 years, $4 million kind of guy. I wouldn't do anything significant to sign him at this point. That could change, by the way, in 6 weeks. Let's roll that out 10 weeks. If in February he's getting a Super Bowl ring and he's blocked well through the rest of the season and the postseason, he's going to be more expensive.
Right.
But
OTC has him at $9 million. So something's a little buggy in their algorithm there.
Yeah.
They're valuing him at $9 million, which is it's above his skis. It's above his head for sure. But I don't know. A lot of moving parts on this offensive line. The one position that has some pretty good stability, obviously, is center with Linderbaum going to be entering his 3rd season. When does the proven performance escalator kick in? The 3rd season or the 4th? It might be the 3rd, and he might be in line to get a pay bump.
The 3rd and then in the 4th. So you get it during an ERFA year first, and then you get it during your RFA year the second time around. So players like Duvernay, who'd already been to a Pro Bowl, got a big bump this year, and who's the other one that's making exactly like $4.3 or $4 million? I'm trying to remember.
Not coming to me, but it's I know you're talking. Duvernay's the main one.
Yeah, it might have. It wasn't Edwards because that would have been a year ago or whatever. But yeah, I can't remember either.
So Linderbaum's your guy. I think he's really your only long-term building block on the O-line right now. You don't know what you have in Voorhees quite yet. The offensive tackles are aging and injured, and your left is a cast off. So And making matters a little bit more complicated, Sam Mustafer, the backup center who they signed away from the Bears, had a good year. Is having a good year. He's a UFA, valued at $4.5 million, which I was surprised by. I would like to see maybe in garbage time, but how does he look at guard? Can he play into the guard competition? Because then maybe it's a little bit more incentive to bring him back.
Both of those guys, both Simpson and Mustafer, will not earn close to that next year. So we can start with that. Is Mustafer a chance to get signed away? Yes, he's a big chance because he probably is not real keen on playing behind Tyler Linderbaum. Even though opportunity could come up at guard or center, I think the Ravens will try and make an offer to him. One of the nice reasons to make an offer to a player like Mustafer is you might actually get a little bit of bump in pay somewhere else. You might also get that for Simpson. I mean, if Simpson were to really ball out for the next 10 weeks, you might end up with a $7 million guard all of a sudden for multiple years that ends up contributing to the comp formula.
The Ben Powers pipeline.
There you go. Yeah, Powers very consistent for a whole year as a pass blocker. So anyway, he was a guy. He's a guy I really liked. But anyway, the Simpson is a lesser version of Ben Powers. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
I don't see Mustafer returning. Sadly, I just don't think it really makes sense for him. He's been on and off the practice squad. They haven't even been able to activate him for a fair number of games. So while he's been a guy I think who could help the Ravens, I think this line is just a little too deep for him to contribute to.
Yeah, it's a shame. You wish he was a Linderbaum was a center or a guard. You wish they wouldn't play the same position because you like to keep them both. But they do both seem pretty typecast into almost center only type of prospects, type of players. So yeah, a lot. The offensive line, as we break this down, I mean, it needs a good bit of attention this offseason.
So are you thinking 2 draft picks at offensive line, or a likelihood then including an early tackle and a late something?
I'd say yes, an early tackle and probably if you retain one of the 2 veteran guards, I would say you could probably okay with just getting a high-end tackle. But if not, you need to add more talent and competition into the mix.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Does that take us to the end? We've talked about every position, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Special teams at all? Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Sure. Jordan Stout's on his rookie deal. The long snapper Eason should be back, right?
Nick Moore, right?
Nick Moore. Yeah. Nick Moore.
And Ott is currently here.
Have you noticed a difference between the two?
No, not really. We see Stouts having a good year. It's long snapper is a position where you want to be the person nobody sees at the party.
Right. Invisible, the invisible man.
Yeah.
And Justin Tucker's the greatest of all time. And, I guess some of his long distance, he's not quite hitting at the same clip a long distance, but most of that's more being blocked than because he's missing them. So you keep him as the highest paid kicker until he's ready to retire, in my opinion.
Oh, he's signed for 4 more years right now. And his cap number is a very flat $6.5 million. Well, it's 5.8 next year, and then 6.5, 6.5, 6.35. I think that ends up being a value deal, and I would agree. I think he makes it to the end of that contract, more likely than not. But we might be talking about the first time where can't afford to sign Justin Tucker, or might not want to sign Justin Tucker after this deal, and it'll be a sad day.
That sure will be a sad day. That's my daughter's favorite player. She wears his jersey, but. Yeah, he's been a legend. I think a Ring of Honor member, and $6 million is a very fair price to pay for the most accurate kicker of all time and the most clutch kicker of all time.
Yeah, be headed to the Hall of Fame, and it'd be really nice to keep him in a Ravens uniform for the rest of his career. I think he probably will be the first ballot kicker of all time. There are people who say that's not going to happen. I don't see it. I think he's in an entire another league from the others. We haven't seen the decline phase yet from him, which is one of the reasons why he's still ahead in terms of percentages of all the other kickers of all time. And so there's a risk that he drops out of that. But I think, in terms of metrics that we've talked about on this show, he's way ahead of every other kicker in history in terms of points above expectation. His misses come from ranges where nobody else even tries to kick.
Right.
So it's nice to see.
Sure. Especially outdoors. Yep.
All right. Always a ton of fun to talk football with you, Vas. I think we come to the end of the road here unless there's anything you want to add. Can you tell people where you can talk football with them?
Sure. I am on Twitter X at Vasilis Beatdown, Vasilis Beatdown, and I am the co-managing editor and a writer, author for Baltimore Beatdown blog. And I have another podcast called At Ravens Way Pod.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there who want to be on a film study short, this is the perfect time this week and during the bye week to get those episodes in. I'm recording some this week, and we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Got some analytics people on, got other people who have some interesting ideas about what the Ravens ought to do organizationally going forward that I think will make some good content. And hopefully we still have some things to listen to during that bye week that'll be fun. For Vas Larikos, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week on Friday Morning GM.